the middle ground between the two extremes of too much or too little of any particular emotion. And today what we're going to be looking at is how to get that, how to acquire that middle ground, and then what one does to, if one were to discover that they are either on one or two extremes and they lack that equilibrium, that middle ground that the Rambam espouses to be the optimum of man's achievements in terms of building moral character. And of course, as always, we're going to compare it with the way Hasidus addresses the same issues and questions. So we begin here at section 4 of chapter 4. V'da knows, said the Rambam, she'elu ha'mailas v'apchisus, that these, their virtues or defects in the Rambam's view, again, means too much or too little of any character, ashalamidis, that are in the personality or the character soul, lo yagiu, will not be achieved, v'yisyasu b'nefesh, and be acquired by the soul, by the person, rak b'kifla pulis habois min amidahi pamim rabes, only with repeating actions that were to come from that character trait, is man arach, for a lengthy time, and becoming accustomed to them. So the way in which one behaves, essentially, is what affects one's character and emotions. So if a person behaves repeatedly by being stingy, he will eventually become stingy, get that character. If one repeatedly behaves reckless, then he will acquire the character trait of a reckless person. And therefore, if the actions are good, they're down in the middle line, this equilibrium, then one will acquire through these actions the attributes of virtue. Then if one were to behave and act negatively, too much or too little of any character, behaving too giving to the point that they're used and abused, or behaving too little to the point of not doing anything, then they will acquire the attributes of defects, which leads to those things. Because by birth, a person does not have any virtue whatsoever or defect, no defect, as we shall explain in chapter 8, where the Rambam addresses the centrality of free choice in Jewish doctrine. And there he's going to describe that by birth, one is not compelled to be one way or the other. Therefore, whatever character traits he has, either good or negative, it's because he was accustomed to them. Because he was accustomed to behave that way from his youth, in accordance to the way his family behaved, and the culture and society in which he lived. And therefore, either the behavior that he was accustomed to from which as a child is down the middle line, and therefore be virtuous, or the behavior in the society and the culture he grew up with or the family he grew up with was too much, too little, as we described before, then he'll be a soul that is sick and that needs healing. So in the Rambam's view, it seems clear that their nature, nurture dominates nature. At least at this point, it would seem from the Rambam that one's born nature almost has zero bearing on his behavior. It's the behaviors he's accustomed to doing by dint of his upbringing, either by his parents, family, society, that make him acquire these character traits, either positive or negative. They nurture him. And it would seem that the reason why the Rambam is doing this is because the Rambam does not want to put anyone out of the purview of capacity to completely change themselves. In other words, if I were to view myself as I am, in essence, born a stingy person, then the person might give up on training myself to become more generous. But because in the Rambam's view, you're not born that way. You're born as a clean slate. So there is no character that you cannot acquire. And every character you have was acquired, maybe from birth, maybe early on, but still acquired. And because it's still acquired, therefore, everybody and anybody has a capacity to undo it and to change their character traits. This is the underlying premise of the Rambam's guide to moral code, is that everyone has the capacity to acquire moral code, and no one is bound by, so quote unquote, their nature. Now, if we were to read this alone, that's the way it would seem. But we identified a few chapters ago that when Rambam discusses free choice, he only talks about two levels of the soul that have free choice: the intellectual and the emotional. There was other parts of the soul, three others, where the person does not have free choice. So the most obvious of them is the way the body functions. You don't have free choice as to how your digestive system works. And another one he identified is one's imagination, one's memories, what we described before as the person's capacity to interact with all the information they give them and then collate them, and then the stream of consciousness that comes running that's out of your control. And there the Rambam did say that it's possible that a person could have a koyach hamaduma, this imaginative part of the soul, this part of the soul that's cognitive but not intelligent necessarily. It's maybe the subconscious that, talks to the conscious that you can barely control. And there the Rambam said that a person could have a defective one from birth, and it's not his fault. There's nothing you can do about it. And we suggested that this is an early identification of mental illness. Now, if that's the case, then when the Rambam says that a person is not born with any character that he cannot change or control, it's specifically talking about moral characters. That precludes the notion of mental health, which means even if we should not conclude, in other words, from this, that the Rambam is saying that a person is not, can't be born with a, mental imbalance that he has to deal with by, going to a doctor or professional and getting some mental health and help. That's certainly a possibility. The Rambam is specifically speaking of moral characters, not mental capacity, which Rambam identified earlier as koyach hamaduma, the imaginative part of the soul, the part of the soul that collates memories and sorts memories and imagines and does things on its own. That Rambam said a person can control, and a person might have a negative one or a defected one or a different type of one. Here, it would seem to me that he's specifically talking about moral characters. That's the first comment we see from this. Another comment we might say on this is, in comparing it to Chassidus, let's first look at the next paragraph before we do that. Okay, so having stated and having set forth that essentially everybody is a clean slate, no one is compelled into one character or another, and therefore everybody has the capacity at any point in time to gain good or, God forbid, negative character traits, not bound by any moral behavior in any way, and the behavior compels the character. Therefore, and therefore he should treat the health of his moral character equal to the health of his body. And just like when it comes to a body who should also be at the middle ground, not too hot, not too cold. So if the body leaves the straight path that it should be on, you see which direction it's heading. And then you will try to bring the body to the other extreme. So, modern example, let's say, is a person should be eating essentially, let's say a person should have essentially, the right amount of vitamins, vitamin D, A, B, C, and all the other vitamins. If we see a person's lacking in them, then a person has to take pills to increase those. Until he comes to the point where he has enough iron in his body because he's taken the iron supplements. A healthy person who has the right amount of iron, the right amount of vitamins, then they just have to eat healthy foods and they maintain their correct amount of vitamins and all the other components the body needs. But if we see that the body is lacking or has too much of some, then you have to overdo the other extreme. So not enough iron, you got to give iron supplements. Too much iron, then I don't know what the things are you have to do, but you have to go to the other extreme. And therefore, when the body comes back to its straight path where it's down the middle again, we will stop compelling it to take extra. So once a person's acquired enough iron, no need to take the supplements. in fact, don't take the supplements. It's too much now. And therefore, and therefore he returns to just behaving healthily, which will keep him down in a healthy, straight, middle ground body. So the same way, this is the way we treat the health of the body. The same thing is true of what one should do with their moral character. By way of example, a person who has too little of something. So let's say he's too stingy. He's a prisus beprisus hanefesh. And therefore this is a defect from the defects of the soul. It's too stingy. And therefore the actions he's going to do as a result of that are going to be negative actions, as we explained earlier in this chapter. And therefore, we want to heal this sickness. We're not going to ask him to behave generously, which is the middle ground. That's as if that would be like someone who is too overheated, the davar mamutza, that we're going to give him some, normal, regular temperature. That's not going to heal him from the sickness. You have to go to the other extreme. In other words, if someone's too overheated, you have to make the temperature way lower than it would be if you were in the middle, right? If you're too hot, you go into the cool room until you cool down, and then you bring the temperature back to a regular 71 or whatever it is, right? And you think of it like using the thermometer as an example, but in the winter, your thermometer is set at, let's say, 72, and in the summer, your house is set at 69, let's say, or 70, right? Why isn't it always set the same? Why isn't it just always set at the same 71? Or whatever the middle would be, right? Because when you're on one extreme, you have to go to the other extreme to balance it out. So if this person's overheated, you can't just give him a regular temperature. You got to take him to the other extreme where it's cool. So likewise, if the person is too stingy, you can't just tell him, behave now like an ordinary, generous person. No, you got to go to the other extreme. You have to train him to be extra splurging, to splurge on himself and others. And he should repeat the action of literally just force himself, compel himself to act over a splurge. I'm not sure what the word is for that. Overly, excessively generous, again and again and again, until the character that's making him be stingy has disappeared. And once that's gone, and it will seem as if he's gotten too close to being over excessive in splurging. And then we'll stop forcing him to be extra splurge. And it's available. Then we tell him, okay, now you behave properly somewhere between the two extremes. And he should stay diligent in this manner, and not to go over above it. The sum total of this is, in Rambam's view, considering that behavior compels character, when a person sees that his behavior is not down the middle, it's either too little or too much, then he's got to go to the other extreme. If he feels like he's being too reckless, then start being over prudent. A person feels like he's too cowardice, push yourself into situations where you have to, break that cowardice and take risks. And then once you, like an elastic, if it's too tight, you pull it and stretch it beyond what it should be. And then when you let go of it, it's going to come back to a little bit wider than it was when you first stretched it out. So take the character to the other extreme until you come back to the middle. Just interestingly, since we're talking about the Rambam, and a couple of days ago, we began the new cycle of the daily study of the Rambam's laws. So I saw a letter that the Rebbe had written to, I think, Rabbi Steinsaltz. And the Rebbe tells him, no doubt, you are making lots of noise and lots of activity and lots of excitement around the study of the Rambam. Now, don't worry about breaking the Rambam's rule of being too over the top, because we haven't yet got to the middle ground. So you can be over the top until we get to the middle. As the Rebbe is telling him, kind of, you can overindulge and be overly enthusiastic about the Rambam study, and then when it catches on, you don't have to be so overly enthusiastic about it. But until then, you got to be overly enthusiastic, right? Because until you've got the middle ground you're looking for, you have to be on the other extreme of where you came from. This is the Rambam's view. But as we're going to see here, he's going to tell us a small subtlety in that it's not always exactly the same. So it's not as if, let's say if we put the middle ground at 50, it's not as if you're at 0, you always go to 100. And if you're 100, you always go to 0. And if you're at 70, because you have too much, you have to go to 20 on the other side. Sometimes you have to be a little bit, there's a nuance into which character you're looking at and whether or not you should go to the other extreme all the way. And he explains, if we see that someone is too extravagant and gives away too much, then we teach him to be stingy, and he should repeat the actions of being stingy. Avol, but, and here's the subtlety, when we want to make someone go from being overly extravagant to the middle ground, we don't tell him to go as extremely stingy as we would tell the stingy person to go extremely extravagant. We say therefore, and this distinction is a subtlety and a secret in knowing how to heal these defects of character. Who in this is to get someone who's overly extravagant down to the middle path of proper generosity. Yaiser Kal, much easier. Yaiser Kal, a more attainable. That to get someone who's completely stingy to the point of proper generosity. In other words, someone who gives away too much, to get him not to give so much to the point that he's giving healthily is much easier than someone who doesn't give at all to get him to the point where he's giving like a healthy person. And therefore, the person who's on the stingy spectrum has to go to the other end of the extravagance. But the person who's on the extravagant spectrum doesn't have to go all the way to the other end of stinginess, but it's got to pull the elastic somewhat in that direction so it can get to the middle. So it's not always exactly an equal pull in either direction. And similarly, to get someone who lacks all sensation, right? The Rambam describes somebody who lacks all desire for pleasure on one extreme, and then the other extreme, someone who indulges in every pleasure he can possibly get. And then the middle ground is the one who is the prudent, proper individual who enjoys what he's supposed to enjoy, but doesn't overdo it. So someone who completely lacks all sensation, has no desire, has no pleasures. So Yoser Kal Yoser Karev, it's much easier and much more attainable to bring him to the point where he's going to enjoy something in life in a proper, prudent manner. Mishul Balataivas Nizar, to get the guy who's way overindulgent in his pleasures, to bring him to the point where he is prudent. Right? Because the guy who's, and therefore, Nichbal al Balataiva, someone who is way over sensitive in that he enjoys every pleasure he can possibly get his hands on. So we will make him repeat, we will make him control himself, and we'll make him behave as if he doesn't feel anything way more times, more than we would the person who lacks feeling, to force him to do pleasures. In other words, a person who's on the spectrum of 100, where he's overindulging every single pleasure possible. We want to get him to 50. So we're going to try to make him go all the way to 0, where he controls all of his pleasures. And then at one point, we'll slowly start to allow him to enjoy his pleasures to the point that he's at 50. Whereas somebody who's at 0 and does not enjoy anything because he just lacks that sensation, which is not a good thing either. He should be somewhere in the middle. So it's not as if we're going to make him go to 100 and make him indulge in every single pleasure he can possibly get. That would also be a mistake, right? So when you're going from 100 to 0, maybe, or 100 to 50, you have to pull to 0. But going from 0 to 50, maybe you got to pull to 60 to 70. You don't have to pull all the way to 100. Likewise, the Nachayev al Racha Levov, we will advise the person who is cowardice, Mesidas Atman Sakonas, to start taking risk, more than we will compel the person who is reckless to Rakas Alevov to behave completely in cowardice and completely prudent, or not taking any risk. So again, a person who likes to take every single risk, we're not going to tell him to take 0 risk. We'll just tell him to curb some of the risks he takes. Someone who takes no risks, on the other hand, we're going to push them as far as we can to take risks, so that hopefully they get to the point in the middle ground. And likewise, a Neville is a person who lacks all dignity. He walks around without any sense of self-respect. So we will train this person to be more. Well, I'm sorry. The Neville here in this case is somebody who's doesn't give. He's not a good-hearted and giving person by nature, not in terms of money necessarily, but in the way they treat others. So if that person doesn't do any giving to others, then we will push them to the extreme of Yisrim Tov Alev to be overly good-hearted. more than we will the person who is way over good-hearted to the point of abuse to go to the other direction. In other words, someone who is way too giving, we're not going to bring them to zero. They're not going to give anything. We're going to try to teach them to slowly say no and not give every single time. Where someone who never gives of themselves, we will try to push them as far as we can so that they learn to give. And this is the manner in which one should heal and acquire good character. So just a comment on comparing this to Chassidus. So built on what we said last week, in that the Rambam describes the ultimate person as equilibrium, never changing, no extremes ever, unless they require these extremes for healing. Chassidus often does encourage passion, sometimes in the extremes, sometimes extreme self-effacement, and sometimes extreme joy. Right? The Chassidic life is not one of equilibrium. It's one of ups and downs and passions and sadness and brokenheartedness and ups and downs. Right? And we explained that perhaps the reason is because the Rambam is addressing becoming a mensch, becoming an upstanding human being. And to become an upstanding human being, one should be at this place of equilibrium. And as we'll learn later, and as we discussed in the past, the Rambam's hope in getting you to this point of equilibrium, this point of being a well-balanced individual, isn't necessarily just for the sake of the character traits they themselves are, but more so that on top of that, you can build a understanding of the divine as much as possible. Now, Chassidus takes you from that understanding of the divine and brings it back into the emotion and says, now that you're a mensch, and on top of that menschkeit, on top of that, moral character, you've now developed an intellectual understanding of God. Now you're going to take that and bring it to your passions, and your passions are definitely going to be somewhat radical sometimes. Sometimes dance for joy, and sometimes, singing and nigging and crying with friends. It's going to have those extremes. So in that sense, we can see also a difference in how moral characters is acquired. In the Rambam, moral character starts from the bottom up. It starts from behavior, and the behavior compels the moral character, the emotion. And this follows the Rambam's, way a person is built. You stack his body health, and on top of that, there's good behavior. On top of that, there's good moral character. And on top of that, there's intellectual pursuit of the divine. Whereas Chassidus goes the other direction. It starts off with an understanding of the divine. And then from there, we build the emotions. And then those emotions are then invested into action. So where the Rambam is going from bottom upward, start with behaviors. Identify the behaviors you need to get to your good character. You're too stingy, okay. So identify behaviors of giving and giving and giving and giving until the point that you're in the middle. Right? And then once you're at the middle, now you just behave that way, the way you're supposed to. And on top of this well-balanced person, you now can start thinking about God. Where Chassidus goes the other direction. You're a mensch, okay, because you follow the Rambam. And now that you're thinking about God, now go the other direction. Take that understanding you have of God, invest it into your emotions. Now we're using the mind to change the emotion, not the action to change the emotion like we did the first time following the Rambam, but now we're taking the mind to change the emotion. The mind that's enthralled by the greatness and grandeur of what it learns in Chassidus about God makes the heart pump and leap with joy, going downward from the mind into the heart. And take all that joy and put it into the next time you wear tefillin. So this is perhaps the full picture of building emotion, combining both what the Rambam is saying and what Chassidus goes, and perhaps they're not necessarily a contradiction, as we explained, in that one precedes the other. First, building that menschlichkeit, that moral dignity, where you're a good person, not too much on this extreme, not too much on that extreme, and now you can think clearly about the divine, and then all of that, those ideas burst forth, going back downwards into emotion, as Chassidus prescribes. And in that sense, sometimes there will be extremes. There will be extreme passion, extreme joy, extreme sadness, extreme love, extreme awe, and so on and so forth. God willing, next week, we're probably going to come to what's most obviously equal or the same commonality between Chassidus and the Rambam, in that both Chassidus and the Rambam have an aversion to inflicting pain upon oneself. The Rambam fought it in his day, and the Baal Shem Tov fought it in his day, as we shall discuss, God willing, next week.